Patricia Mary McAdam was born in approximately 1950 in Scotland. Scotland in 1950 was a country of close communities and hard-working families. Life in the towns and villages of the Scottish lowlands moved at a pace set by work, family, and the changing seasons. Neighbours knew each other. Children played in the street and came home when their mothers called. The church, the local school, and the corner shop were the centres of daily life, and the bonds between families ran deep. It was a world where people looked after their own, where community was not an idea but a daily practice, felt in the sharing of news across a garden fence, or the quiet kindness of a neighbour who noticed when something was wrong. Scotland in those years had a particular warmth to it, the warmth of people who had come through difficult times together and knew the value of what they had built. It was into this Scotland that Patricia Mary McAdam was born, and it was in the town of Dumfries, in the southwest of the country, that she grew up. Dumfries sat on the banks of the River Neath, close to the Solway Firth and the English border. It was a market town, the main hub for the farms and villages of the surrounding countryside, known warmly across Scotland as the Queen of the South. The poet Robert Burns had spent the last years of his life in Dumfries and was buried there, and the town carried that connection with quiet pride. It was not a large or dramatic place. It was the kind of town where a family could build a comfortable, settled life, where the same faces appeared in the same streets year after year, and where children grew up knowing everyone and being known by everyone in return. Patricia, known to everyone close to her as Pat, grew up in that town with her parents, Matthew and Mary McAdam. The family lived at Lochside Road in Dumfries. Matthew and Mary raised their daughter in the way that Scottish working families raised their children in those years, with care, with structure, and with the expectation that hard work and decency would be enough to build a good life. Pat was, by the accounts left behind by those who knew her, a lively and warm young woman. She was sociable. She liked company. She liked to go out and enjoy herself. She was 17 years old in the early months of 1967, and she was full of the energy and appetite for life that 17 carries with it. Scotland by the mid-1960s had begun to change in ways that a teenager like Pat would have felt directly. New music had arrived. Rock and roll, then the beat groups, then the sounds that were reshaping what a night out meant for young people across the country. The dance halls that had been the great social institutions of Scottish life for decades were giving way to something faster and more alive. Glasgow, Scotland's biggest city, was the centre of all of it. Its venues and its shops and its energy drawing young people in from the surrounding towns on weekends. For a 17-year-old girl in Dumfries, a trip to Glasgow for a day's shopping and a night at the dancing was a genuine adventure. A chance to be part of something larger and more exciting than the everyday rhythms of a market town. On the evening of Sunday the 19th of February 1967, the first weekend after St. Valentine's Day, Pat McAdam set off for Glasgow with a friend. Before she left home that day, she had dressed for a night out. She was wearing a black cocktail dress, a yellow cardigan, a purple coat, and black strapped suede shoes. She and her friends spent the day in Glasgow shopping. That evening, they went dancing. Later in the night, they attended a party. By the time they were ready to head home, it was late, and they needed a lift south on the road back toward Dumfries. Accepting lifts along the main road between Glasgow and the south of Scotland was not uncommon for young people in those years. Pat and her friend accepted a lift from a lorry driver heading south. They climbed into the cab, and the lorry headed out of Glasgow on the old single-carriageway road southward. Pat's friend was dropped off first, in the town of Annan on the Solway coast, approximately 15 miles west of Dumfries. Pat was still in the cab. She was heading onto Dumfries to Lochside Road, to her parents Matthew and Mary. Her friend stood and watched the lorry drive away with Pat still inside it, heading in the direction of Dumfries. Patricia McAdam never arrived home that night. She was not there the following morning. She has never been seen again. Police were notified and a search began. Pat's friend was interviewed at length by detectives and gave a description of the lorry driver who had offered them the lift. Appeals were made to the public for information. Within 3 weeks of those appeals, detectives had identified a name. The man described was Thomas Ross Young, a lorry driver, 33 years old, from Glasgow. Pat's friend was taken to an identity parade. She picked out Thomas Ross Young clearly and confidently as the man who had driven them south that night. When investigators looked into Young's background, what they found was deeply troubling. He had been convicted of indecent assault at the age of 13 and had been locked up for it. His criminal record since had continued in the same direction. At the time Patricia McAdam disappeared, he was already facing a separate charge of raping a 19-year-old woman in the county of Herefordshire in the south of England, where he had also worked as a lorry driver. His job gave him access to roads and routes across the length of Britain. His history showed he had used that access to harm women before. Young was interviewed by police. He denied any involvement. He said Pat had never been in his lorry. Police at that point did not have sufficient evidence to charge him, and he was not arrested. The search for Pat continued with great determination. Officers and volunteers searched roadside verges, woodlands, riverbanks and fields across a wide area to the west of Annan, through the areas of Kinmount, Hodham and Dalton in particular, which lay along the route the lorry would have taken between Annan and Dumfries. The searches were extensive and sustained. Nothing was found. A journalist named Frank Ryan, who worked for the Daily Record and was based in Dumfries, had been closely following the case from the beginning. Determined to find answers, Ryan made the decision to travel to Holland to seek the assistance of a Dutch clairvoyant named Gerard Croiset, based in the city of Utrecht, who had attracted attention in similar missing persons cases elsewhere in Europe. Croiset agreed to help. Through what he described as images forming in his mind, he described an area he believed was connected to Pat's disappearance. A bridge over a river with exposed tree roots on the banking, a house with signs nearby, and part of a car and a wheelbarrow visible at the vicinity. He said he believed Pat had been murdered, and that her body had been thrown into a river from which it had eventually been washed out to sea. Police took the description seriously enough to conduct a focused search of an area that matched it. Beside a bridge over the River Milk, near the settlement of Middleshaw, between Lockerbie and Annan. The search was carried out carefully. Nothing was found. Pat was not there. Throughout all of this, through the weeks, the months, and then the long years that followed, Matthew and Mary McAdam never gave up. They travelled hundreds of miles following up reported sightings of their daughter, asking questions wherever those reports led them, holding on to the hope that something would break open, that someone would finally give them news of where Pat was. every lead came to nothing. There was no trace of her anywhere. Matthew and Mary McAdam died heartbroken within a few years of Pat's disappearance, without ever learning what had happened to their daughter. The case remained open but unresolved for decades. Then, approximately 12 years before the 50th anniversary of Pat's disappearance, around 2004, police conducted a cold case review and created a dedicated inquiry team to go back over the evidence. The review produced enough to act upon. Thomas Ross Young, by then an elderly man serving life sentences in Peterhead Prison for murder, attempted murder, and rape, appeared via video link from that prison to Dumfries Sheriff Court. He was charged with the murder of Patricia McAdam on the road between Lochmarben and Annan near Charlesfield Farm on the 19th of February 1967, by means unknown. The case, however, never came to trial. The Crown Office assessed the evidence and issued a statement that there should be no proceedings against this individual meantime. Young was not tried. The charges were not pursued. Thomas Ross Young died in July 2014 at the age of 79. He had been serving life sentences for murder, attempted murder, and rape. Those convictions themselves carried serious unresolved questions. Investigators working on the case of convicted serial killer Angus Sinclair had concluded that one of the murders for which Young had been convicted, the killing of a 37-year-old woman named Frances Barker in Glasgow, bore all the hallmarks of Sinclair's other killings, and that Sinclair rather than Young may have been responsible for it. Young had always maintained his innocence of the Barker murder. He appealed his conviction multiple times. Every appeal was rejected. He died in prison, still maintaining that innocence. The question of whether he killed Frances Barker remains unresolved. The question of what happened to Patricia McAdam on the road south from Glasgow on the 19th of February 1967 has never been answered in any court of law. Patricia McAdam's body has never been found. No one has ever been convicted of her murder or of any offence connected to her disappearance. The case is officially listed as an unsolved murder by Police Scotland, with the date of the crime recorded as the 19th of February 1967. The Scottish Murders podcast examined the case across multiple episodes, including an episode released in October 2025 covering the final legal developments and the ongoing frustration of those who have sought justice on Pat's behalf. Hello everyone, thank you for listening and drop any feedback below. I would love to hear your thoughts and hope to see you again right here on Cold Case UK.